you could receive anal sex in a kinky way and you could receive anal sex in a non-kinky way.
Right.
I don't know if you knew that.
I never really thought about it, but I'm thinking about it now.
It's worth thinking about.
I'm Cyndi Darnell, and welcome to The Erotic Philosopher, the podcast where we examine and explore sex and relationships through social, cultural, political, and other lenses, and discover ways to solve some very diverse and stimulating erotic quandaries. Today's guest is Dr Dulcinea Pitagora. Dulcinea also goes by the name of Alex and uses gender-neutral they/them pronouns. Alex is a psychotherapy and sex therapy private practice at the Manhattan Alternative Wellness Collective in support of all sexualities, genders, and lifestyles right here in New York City. Today, Dr. Alex and I are discussing how to create a deeper and more connected style of communication to help us manage some of the fear and shame that comes up when exploring sex and pleasure. So, Alex, how did you decide you wanted to be a sex therapist when you grew up?
Well, I think I knew I wanted to be a therapist for a while, and then I realized that I wanted to work within the specific identities that I have because there was a real need there. I'm pretty out about being a kink-identified person.
Right.
I'm also non-monogamous. I decided to really focus in on that, and that's also where I felt most comfortable and where I had learned a lot of things that I felt like, maybe would be very useful in my practice.
Yeah.
And I really love learning and love sort of deepening my understanding of things. And I like to do all of that academic stuff.
Yeah. So you just finished your PhD. What was it in?
In clinical sexology.
Did you do a specific topic for your PhD, or was coursework broader than that?
There was broader coursework, and then you do a dissertation. So the dissertation is research that you conduct. And my research looked at heteronormativity and the way someone's alignment with heteronormativity, like if they have very strong heteronormative beliefs or not so strong, how that affects their experiences of sexual shame and sexual pride. If you have more or less heteronormative beliefs, would you have more or less sexual shame or sexual pride? But specifically, the group that I did my research in were straight cisgender males who are anally receptive.
Okay.
And so looking at that group, because, here's an interesting group of people who have very privileged identities in their cisgenderness and in their straightness and maleness. And then some not so privileged identities in the fact that they like atypical sexual practices, like receiving anal sex.
Yeah.
And, so I thought it would be interesting to look, and see how their heteronormative beliefs would affect whether or not they experience sexual shame and or sexual pride. And then I was also looking at people who are kinky in that group. So straight cisgender males who are anally receptive and who identify as kinky and who don't, because you could receive anal sex in a kinky way and you could receive anal sex in a non-kinky way.
Right.
I don't know if you knew that.
I don't
Never
think
really
I did.
thought about it?
No, and I never really thought about it, but I'm thinking about it now.
It's worth thinking about. It could be fun to think about.
So what did your research uncover? What did you discover?
I found out that there is a lot of protection that these privileged identities have.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of protection from sexual shame. So there were not necessarily higher levels of sexual shame in this group, even though they were doing a sexual activity that, so they were not really ashamed of receiving anal sex. Straight cis men in this group. And there were 900 or so of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was your sample, was 900 straight cis men who
receive anal sex.
Yeah. And the shame factor was very low.
Yeah, there was not a significant, there was not a big influence.
Was that your hypothesis when you started the research?
Well, no, I mean, I thought there would be dissonance there because
I would have thought so.
Yeah, because, but it turned out that, it was protective. Like those identities are protective, and which means
so when you say, sorry, go on. I was going to ask what
it just means that you can be doing something that's outside of what is perceived by your identity, but if you're very secure in your identity and your identities are considered by society to be the strongest ones, then, you can go outside of that identity, but still feel okay with it. Which, I was thinking that they wouldn't feel so okay with it.
Yeah, I would have thought that too.
But they are. I think it's great news, actually, that my hypothesis was off on that. Because what that means is that it's straight cis men should go ahead and receive anal sex. It's going to be fine. Like, maybe it's going to be great, So I think that's actually great news.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people are afraid to explore in that way.
Yeah.
Because of the, what it means to their identity. But the good news is it doesn't have to mean anything for your identity. And also the people that are not exploring that are really missing out on this great potential for pleasure, because particularly cisgender male bodies have this prostate that is a pleasure center for them. And in a lot of them, it remains untapped.
Yes.
Quite literally.
Literally
and so, thank you. And so I feel bad for the people that haven't explored their prostate, that have one, because they could get a lot of sexual pleasure. Yeah. And so I think that it's good news what my research, brought to light is that they're probably going to be fine. Like they might just be totally fine, and also very happy that they had.
And how did you find these 900 straight cis men who stick things in their butts to talk to you? That's quite a thing to pull off, I must say.
Well, it was all online, so I didn't have them all in the room or anything.
They didn't come here.
No. It was all an online survey, and so it was posted on the internet in different places. My guess is that a lot of them came from Reddit, because there are lots of people hanging out on Reddit. Right. And I posted there as well as on FetLife and just in general on social media.
So in this discussion today, as we kind of unpack notions of sex in terms of right and wrong, I guess for folks listening is to be clear that we're not necessarily talking about any given kind of sex, but that we're talking about probably an erotic experience.
Yeah, right. Because the word sex, or I think when a lot of people say sex, they either have an image or they have an understanding that sex means penis and vagina intercourse. That could be included in what we're talking about, but it's much broader than that, and it could not have anything to do with genitalia, maybe.
And I think in terms of, when we're unpacking what erotic activities are, I think there's a real tendency for all of us, to fall into this idea of sex having to look a certain way or having to be a certain way, whether we're doing genital-based sex or other stuff.
I think everybody should have the freedom to explore themselves. And a lot of people are embarrassed to ask questions or don't think that they should, or it hits their ego in a certain way, or they sound inexperienced, or they're afraid of afraid of humiliation or shame, or there's some things that people are afraid of. And so they avoid talking about it, which is exactly why I think people should. Yeah, anybody should not assume like, well, what do you mean by sex? Even if, so say that we're two people that want to have penis and vagina sex. One of us has a penis and one of us has a vagina, and we want to merge our genitalia in that way. Yeah. Like, it doesn't mean that, there's just one way to do that. There's infinite ways to even do that. Yeah. And so having a conversation about, well, what does that mean to you? And like, how do you like to do that? And, do you like the lights on or off type of thing? There's much more than that also. And what else do you like to do? And in what order of events and for what duration and intensity and just all the things. There's so many questions that there's, all these great questions you could ask that people, I think, they avoid it. Yes. And that's why I think, why not have these kind of conversations regardless of your orientation, kinky or not, or even if it seems like your sex is the most kind of, garden variety and mundane. What does garden variety even mean?
And even I think for folks who have been in long-term established relationships of whatever flavor, we get into a groove, we get into a habit, we get into a situation where we do what we know the other one likes, or what they used to like when we first got together, when perhaps we did have a conversation like that. But it can sometimes be a bit of a labor-intensive process to keep doing it. So what strategies have you encountered or created, or that you know of, that help folks who maybe have been in a relationship for a long time, an erotic play relationship, whether it's a marriage or a partnership or whatever?
Yeah.
to bring up changing the program when they haven't brought it up for a long time, or there is that fear of rocking the boat.
I think this is probably true for a lot of the work that you do too. And I'll just ask you if it's true about working on communication in general and being okay, like how communication is done and being okay with awkwardness and discomfort, because that's where learning happens and exciting things can happen. But I often suggest that people do regular check-ins even when you don't need one, because then you're in the habit of doing it. And then you can find out these things, and you can have it, you know what it feels like, and you know you're going to do that, and that can be as whatever frequency that people feel comfortable with, right? But
I think that's such a valid point that you make, of being able to bring that into, a relational practice, that you're doing it whether it's in a sex context or not, that if you're doing it just as you describe dinner, or you describe the movies that you like to watch, that getting in the habit of actually communicating with a bit of intention behind it, with a bit of genuine inquiry, I think can really flip things around for folks.
Yeah, because we get these inputs all around us all the time, and we're absorbing all this new information all the time, even if we don't notice it. And so even unrelated, like how we want to live our lives in other ways, and that could affect our sex lives or not, but it's just great to have the practice to understand that we're changing, even if we're not noticing that we're changing. It's good for one's own introspection, right? And then talking about it with your partner can be great for the relationship, but I think for the individual too. So for the three different entities, say somebody is in a relationship with one person, I feel like there's three different entities there. There's the two individuals, and then the third one, which is their combination of wherever they intersect.
Yes, absolutely.
So those things can all, affect each other in a reciprocal way, and like in and out of each other, like, which sounds kind of sexual, but I didn't mean for it to sound sexual.
No, but it is, because this is, I think, the thing. And that was the whole kind of thrust, speaking of things that aren't sexual. The whole thrust of me wanting to make this podcast was to create a space where we could have slightly deeper than normal conversations about sex, but not just sex as it exists outside of our lives, but sex as it exists within the complications of being a human, and learning how to communicate, learning how that when we don't communicate, which is the speaking and the listening part, not just the talking at somebody part, but actually hearing what's being said, and then co-creating a new erotic schedule or paradigm or template from that. That it's easier to practice doing that about non-sex things and then bringing it across to sex things. But a lot of folks, we even struggle doing that. Yeah. Which makes me then think about, in order to sort of bridge the gap between the erotic and the mundane, how would we bring our attention to creating a dynamic between partners that is a bit more attentive than normal?
A lot of times people want things to be easy, right? Yeah. And that's the thing. It was like, why do we have to do this? Why can't it just be easy? I just wish I could just do it and have it be easy. But I think that just reminding people that anything that's easy now probably didn't start out to be easy. Yeah. And what did you do? You practiced doing it, or you just had to do it a bunch of times, and then it started to feel easy. Right. And so, that's one thing that I like thinking about. I think that there's this apprehension around doing something hard or difficult, right? But it can become easier over time. But then what is the fear of doing something hard also? And, what are the potential rewards that can come out of being challenged or feeling awkward? It's really about, I think it's a lot about being okay with being vulnerable and being kind of exposed to your partner. And so here comes where intimacy enters into sex.
Yeah, I don't think sex needs intimacy in it. But I also think that without it, it can get a bit boring. But that's just my personal opinion. And I think intimacy can mean so many things. That it can mean, sharing a home together, but it can also mean allowing parts of yourself to come forward that perhaps you wouldn't normally, and then to allow somebody to take care of that with you or for you or at you or vice versa, however that plays out, or maybe both. Again, I think in terms of expanding our erotic repertoire, that idea of that we have of wanting to avoid difficulty or avoid hardship or avoid stuff it's too much, it's too hard, it's, whatever. I get it. And I mean, I'm like that too. I don't think anybody runs toward things that feel shit.
Well,
But
some people do.
Some people do. Okay.
Some people do in a way that's probably not good for them.
Right.
And then some people do in a way that is maybe part of their kink or something,
Okay.
and they're challenging themselves
okay.
and pushing their boundaries. Some people want to feel bad to feel good, like they want to put themselves in a situation where they kind of feel bad because it's a controlled way of feeling bad. And I guess I'm thinking of maybe some of like the kind of kink scenes that people might do.
Yeah.
Where they get into a headspace where they are, maybe like humiliation or degradation or something like that. But that's a controlled environment. And so in the world we live in, we can be subject to humiliation and degradations
Absolutely.
galore, like at any point
and
of day. Non-consensually in an uncontrolled way, sometimes more than others, right? But then if you do it in a controlled way, then that can be somehow, you can enter into it and then leave it. And some people really are into that. But yeah, that, like you said, that's a much smaller number. Yeah. But coming back away from that kind of sex and into more, the larger percentages of the population not wanting to be challenged by sex. I wonder if partly it's about we're socialized to believe that we're supposed to perform in a certain way.
Yeah, right.
And then challenging that might be challenging that our identities are what we're supposed to believe that our identities are.
Yeah.
I think that's a big problem, I think.
Yeah.
And
a problem insofar as to go near any of this kind of stuff is to actually sort of look into your own soul.
Well, we could go into a philosophical discussion about souls, but I don't know if we're going there today.
Right. Maybe
but
soul's not the word I mean, but
like just the belief that people have around their identity or the way they're supposed to perform their identity. Like if someone identifies as straight and cisgender, there are some very specific ideologies that go along with that. And so then people are supposed to automatically know what that means. Yeah. And perform in that way and interact with and have sex in that way. Mm-hmm. But there really are a lot of different ways to have sex, as a straight cisgender person, It can be like there are lots of challenges, or not challenges even, but just variations in the kind of sex that the majority of people have or think that they're supposed to have. So I feel like there might be some vulnerability though in that, because people think like I'm supposed to automatically know who I am and I'm supposed to just be able to do these things. And that's not true though. Yeah. So I don't know if I think that a lot of people are nervous about it because they think that they're supposed to know. Yes. But it's not true that they're just supposed to know. Yes. It's a learning process, and being told by someone else, doesn't mean that just because someone else told you how you're supposed to be. Yeah. And you're like, okay, when you're a kid, like you don't know any better than to, some kids react against that, but mostly we just absorb. We're sponges and we absorb this stuff. And, so then as an adult, we've already absorbed it. And so it's extra work to have to go outside of that. But I think to really find out who you are, and look inside of yourself and be introspective and decide what it is you want instead of, to really separate out. And I'm thinking of now this one person I'm working with about sexuality just popped into my head. And they said something that I thought was so great to hear someone say to me, which was like, I'm really working on trying to separate out in my head what the things are that I want or know who I am and what people have told, what I've learned or been told I'm supposed to be. Yeah. And I was like, yes, I wish every single, I was so excited that person said that to me. Yeah. Absolutely. Because it means that people know the difference, that there's been things put in there. Yeah. About our identities and our sexualities. Like we're supposed to be sexual in a certain way. And then there's the things that we really want, ourselves as individuals. And to know how to tell the difference between those things is maybe difficult, but also really valuable.
It is difficult.
Yeah.
And it's sort of one of those things too. It's hard to know what you like.
Yeah.
If you've never had it before. And I often use the analogy of, describing curry to somebody, like them food. How would you describe curry to somebody who's never eaten it? Mm-hmm. You can say that it's sort of spicy and saucy and these kinds of things. But then you can be thinking, oh, is it like salsa? Is it like, Mexican food?
Right.
And it's a really specific thing that I think sometimes words alone, it's just not going to give it the depth and the dexterity that it needs, the texture to know. And that sometimes if you're going to work out if you like curry, the only way you're going to know is to eat it. Just have a spoonful of it and see.
Yeah.
And then maybe have another spoonful. And then maybe have another. And then you'll know if you like it. But we don't give ourselves that same grace with sex. Or some people do, but a lot of us don't. We're just all eating pizza because we didn't realize curry existed.
Sometimes you can have curry and pizza, because imagine dipping pizza in curry. That sounds amazing. Yeah.
Maybe there's a restaurant idea there.
Yeah.
So Alex, now I have a listener letter that I'd like to read to you for us to discuss.
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right.
Hey philosophers, I'm a 48-year-old straightish man from Australia and proudly sober now for 8 years. I met my wife in New York 25 years ago and our relationship was intense. Our relationship was based on our love of art and music and culture. We absorbed everything that New York offered us in the 90s until it all came a little bit too much. So fast forward to 2006, we returned to Australia. Since then, we've had 2 kids, and while the parties here aren't as wild as they were in the 90s, we were still enjoying ourselves at lifestyle parties and getting pretty high on drugs and on life. And then 8 years ago, I had an epiphany. I realized that wasn't interesting for me anymore. The highs that I got from drugs and parties were not getting me high anymore. I became depressed and withdrawn. And what used to excite me just doesn't anymore. I've been sober for 8 years now, and I have a regular meditation practice. I've been in therapy on and off, and I've dealt with some of the problems that I had, which meant regular escapes with drugs and partying just no longer felt like journeys that I wanted to take anymore. On the advice of my therapist, I developed an interest in Tantra and have taken classes with tantrikas from all over the world. Now it's changed the way I see myself and sex and relationships. I want more connection, I want more intimacy, and anything else just feels empty to me. Even though my wife and I have always had an open relationship, the sex I'm craving is the most soul-opening, heart-connecting kind. But the trouble is that my wife isn't sober, and sadly for me, she's not interested in sex without the highs that we used to get into together. So this is my question. What do you do when one of you wants connected spiritual sex and the other wants fantasy-based, drug-fueled sex? And is there a way to make that work?
When I think of fantasy-based, I think of role play, but I think that even in the absence of some kind of scripted or negotiated or very intentional role play scene, I think that sex oftentimes is a lot like role play anyway, where we're just, we're playing the roles of this is the way my sexual self interacts with this other person who's doing their sexual self. Yeah. And these are the roles we're playing right now. And so it doesn't mean that, you're being a different person. If you're doing fantasy based sex, it means that you're discussing certain parameters and you're talking about things that aren't the current reality, but the people involved are still the actual people there in real life, in reality, whether or not they're doing something that's an elaborate fantasy or maybe not even that elaborate. There's a potential for connection because it's still them involved and they're still emphasizing parts of themselves. Yeah. Even if someone is a brilliant actor, they're still using themselves as a vehicle. Yeah. Sometimes people use fantasy for more connection because they find it to be more a liberating space where they can release a part of themselves that never would see the light of day otherwise, or the dark of night, depending if you have the lights on or not.
A container for that, for that theater, if you will, to be played out and to be rolled out. So, one of the complexities that I hear from him in this context is that he's sober and his wife's not.
I think that some of those things are fine together, but then
Yeah.
other things maybe are not. Taking some kind of substance, some people find it connecting. It kind of can depend on what it is. And I'm not here to judge what adults do with their bodies. I'm really not. I would ask questions of concern if something was going on where they weren't healthy as a result, or they were suffering or something. But there are certainly people I've spoken to that use substances in ways that lead to connection, that they find. And I think that could be possible. I think it can be also very difficult because it can affect a lot of means of connection, right? Like, it can affect people's memory. Like, if you can't remember the experience, how do you know if you got a sense of connection from that? Like what, also it can affect consent and judgment and things like that, which if those things aren't in place, consent and judgment, your ability to make judgment calls, have good solid judgment, and to give or receive consent, those again are part of the container, the liberating container. Right. So if you have some very solid things in place, then you can be very free within that container.
Yeah. It makes me think, like, with this particular couple in this particular context, going back to what we were talking about a while ago, with being able to talk about this stuff outside of the context of sex, like not when we're in the middle of doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, from the letter, it doesn't say how well they communicate and what's going on. I mean, they're still together after 20-something years. They've moved across the world together. They have kids together. They know each other well. And from what he was saying in the letter, he really loves her, and it's breaking his heart that she's not sober. I can't tell how much of it is that she's not sober or that he has changed so much.
Yeah.
If that's part of what's breaking his heart.
Right.
But I wonder how much they talk about stuff in general in their relationship, that they could then bring that across into their sex world and be able to talk about.
Right.
He wants the tantric, esoteric sex, and she wants the swing party kind of
and
all-in feeling.
If they're able to have conversations about it, then maybe the conversations can look like, I want not so much I want this thing and you want this thing, and those things are different. Right. So, but like, I want how I feel when this thing is happening, or I like these particular aspects of this thing.
Yes.
And then say like, oh, okay, well, that's available here and this is available over there.
So identifying the feeling that we want to have. That's really crucial.
Picking it apart.
That's really crucial.
And you can only do that if you can really get into some challenging conversations and exploratory conversations, and also really know yourself and figure out, oh, well, I don't know. Like, I never thought about, I really just like swinging parties, but what is it exactly that I like about it?
Yeah.
How do I feel? What is going on around me? Is everything great, or is it only some things or most things, or these couple things? And then if they're available in different places, maybe they can extract those things that are wonderful and then find them, and then like make a new thing together, like collaborate on a new thing together that has those components,
that has those elements,
but that takes some, maybe not even one, maybe multiple conversations and exploratory conversations, and really introspecting a lot individually, and then being able to, hopefully do that together.
And I think it comes back to that idea that we had earlier about integrating this into a way of living. Not just something that you do on the weekends, that you do it with everything in your life. Yeah,
to get in the habit of doing that, so that you can not be afraid of it then next time. Like, oh, actually that was fine, and I could do that, and I got a good reaction. Or I got a really bad reaction, and it was really difficult, but we made it through, and we figured out what to do with that, and practicing that. So then when the really challenging ones come up, then you have that, again, there's like a foundation set for that.
I just want to jump on something that you just said about fear. How do we manage fear in an interpersonal context, not when we're being run over by a truck?
Well, maybe sometimes it's not so different. Maybe there's a bit of running away, like trying to get out of the way, and like running away as fast as we can. Like sometimes people manage fear with that. Yeah. There are these things that happen so quickly. It's so automatic, like fear, the automatic response is defensiveness. Yeah. And it can be so automatic and fast that you just jump into the defensiveness. We don't even know we're being defensive or
Right,
why.
It's so primal.
It's just I have to protect myself, and I want to protect myself so efficiently
Yes.
and quickly that I don't even know I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
so,
evolution, for looking after us.
Right. Well, that worked maybe before, but like sometimes it's not so necessary. But yeah, then so awareness that it is fear.
And being able to give it a name and say, I feel afraid. And then the next thing of what am I afraid of? Am I afraid of us not having good sex again? Am I afraid of you leaving me? Am I afraid of me leaving you? Am I afraid that we're just going to be stuck in this no-go zone forever? There's so many, I guess, possibilities in there that being able to unpack fear, either with a therapist or a partner or a friend or somebody at least, is so crucial to moving through so many of these erotic quandaries, I guess, especially where fear gets us, and gets us stuck.
So a lot of times fear will stop conversations and make and effectively censor somebody, right?
Yeah, really.
From themselves maybe, or then from their partner, right? And so if the status quo is happening, that probably could keep happening, or maybe it would end eventually. Mm-hmm. Maybe it would just blow up, or things would deconstruct. Mm. But I always like to say to people, like, well, you can take a calculated risk, and you can confront these things, and or you could try that, and then you could go back to where you are now. If that doesn't work, maybe you can go back to where you are now, and things can go on indefinitely like that. Usually, I think that sometimes people don't realize, like, I'm going to make this change, and like it has to be some forever change, but you can make multiple changes.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
But then
keeping your options open, I guess. It's not, none of these things are finite or permanent.
Yeah. A lot of times people are afraid of finding out something about themselves. Like they're going to like something sexually that makes them feel funny about themselves or whatever it is.
And then it takes us into that space of, well, what does that say about me? What does that mean? And maybe there is a meaning. Maybe there is no meaning. Maybe it's just, you like curry and the other one likes pizza, and that's just how it is. It doesn't necessarily always mean something, but it can be, I think, part of the human condition to put meaning onto things that may or may not be, accurate. It's such a subjective word anyway, what's accurate,
Our brains are like meaning making machines, and it's just like it's like a default setting in the brain is to just try to make sense out of things and make meaning. And I think that might have to do with safety and control, and feeling like I understand something, or this makes sense to me, therefore it feels safer. It feels like some more controllable in some way.
Right.
I'm guessing it's something to do with that.
Yeah.
And so it does make sense that we try to do that. But I'm not so sure that sex, or like our sexual identities or practices or preferences, have to make sense. I think that you can make sense out of them sometimes, but I don't know that it's necessary.
I agree. I think we can find ourselves in such an extraordinary place of suffering through an over-analysis of sexuality and identity and practice. I think it's nourishing to a degree to do some, if you're inclined to it. It's also nourishing to a degree if you're experiencing problems. Then I think it's probably crucial. But then there's also that line where it can lead us into murky territory.
Right. The most frequently I hear people trying to really make sense of like why, is the question, like, why am I like this? Or why am I into this?
Yes.
And it's usually they're looking, they think there's something wrong with them. Yeah. So that's, and I think that there's a difference between being introspective and trying to figure yourself out and explore your sexuality. When you're not in the habit of doing that, then absolutely do it. Yeah. But if you're doing it and your goal is to prove that you're doing it because you think something's wrong with you, and you maybe shouldn't have those kind of sexual feelings. Yeah. I think doing some introspection around that is great. But if you keep doing it because you feel like you're not supposed to be that way for some reason, and there's nothing, and you're not harming anyone or yourself, by having those kind of sexual preferences, then I would say,
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
So if people want to work with you, how do folks find you?
I have a website called dulcineapitagora.com.
Can you spell that?
DulcineaPitagora.com. And I work remotely with people on video if they're not in New York City, but mostly I work in New York City. And when I do psychotherapy, it's in New York City, but I can do other kinds of consultation and counseling outside of, just anywhere on the planet that has internet. And, but if also people go to kinkdoctor.com, which is fewer letters, and it's kinkdoctor.com. That does link, there's a link somewhere on there to my practice website, but I can be contacted through either of those places. Sometimes it's easier to remember Kink Doctor, but my practice website is the first one.
Okay. And you're taking new clients at the moment?
I mean, I generally have room for drop-ins here and there. I might have a spot right now.
It's worth trying.
Yeah, it's worth asking and finding out, which I think is the theme of today.
Yes, that's exactly
Ask.
right. Ask and you shall find something.
Maybe something.
Maybe something that you wanted, maybe something you didn't want, but you
didn't expect.
You'll get something out of it.
Yeah.
All right.
Hello, listeners. To submit an erotic quandary for the philosophers to ponder, follow the Erotic Philosopher on Instagram and Twitter at the Erotic Philos. That's PHILOS. And click on the Google form link in the bio. And to discover more about my online sexology courses, as well as how to work with me directly, head on over to CyndiDarnell.com. That's CyndiDarnell.com. Thanks for listening.